I was off of active duty. I remained in the inactive reserve, individual ready reserve they call it in the Marine Corps. But I was not on active duty. When I was with Air America, I was a civilian. Now, subsequent to all of that back then, in recent decades, it's been revealed. It really wasn't ever much of a secret that Air America was owned by Central Intelligence Agency, and that we were in effect government employees, even though we were technically private citizens back then. Yeah.
Now this was during the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
During the Vietnam War, which I prefer to call the Indochina War, because most of my time over there was actually in the neighboring country of Laos. If you're familiar with the way things were operating back then, most of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and the Sihanouk Trail, which is the way the enemy logistically supported themselves, most of that ran entirely through Laos, and then some out of Cambodia into Laos and on into Vietnam. So I prefer to call it the Indochina War, and I was there all of 1967, most of 1968. Almost all of that time was all of that flying time was in Laos. I spent a little bit of time, surprisingly, in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive, which is a whole different story. But I certainly didn't intend to get involved in the Tet Offensive, although it was really an offensive that was taking place all over the country, including Laos. But I kind of got trapped there because I had flown in commercially and there was no commercial way to get out. And when the offensive started, commercial air traffic stopped. So, but that's another story.
What do you remember from the Tet Offensive?
I'm sorry?
What do you remember from the Tet Offensive?
Well, I remember being surprised by it. It's a long story, but one of my best friends, still one of my best friends, was serving in the Army. And down in 3 Corps in Vietnam, a place called Vian, with 1st Infantry Division, and I had intended to visit him because there was going to be a truce. There was always a truce. There had been always a truce in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. Both sides seemed to take their packs off and relax for at least a few days during Tet each year. It's a big holiday in Vietnam. So we thought that was an ideal time for me to come visit, and of course that truce turned into the biggest enemy offensive of the war. I got there the day before it began, and of course we quickly realized what was going on with attacks all over the country, and so he immediately started trying to get back to where he was supposed to be with his unit. And I immediately started trying to get back to where I was supposed to be with Air America. But I had flown in, as I said, commercially. No commercial traffic ended during the Tet Offensive. There was no commercial traffic outbound. So I spent about 10 days, I think maybe 11 or 12 days, bouncing around the country, trying to find a way back to where I was supposed to be. Excuse me.
So how long was it until you went back to active duty in the Marine Corps?
When I left Air America in late summer of '68, August I think it was, I came back to Atlanta, my hometown, and I was hoping to catch on with the airlines. In the meantime, I joined the Marine Corps Reserve. There was a reserve helicopter squadron right there in Atlanta, flying the same aircraft that I was already current in. And so I joined that squadron, started applying for the airlines. Nothing happened with the airlines for several months. I did finally get hired in January of '69 with the airlines. And that began my airline career, but then for the next 30 plus years, I spent a lot of time bouncing back and forth between active duty and reserve duty. As the years went by and I somehow kept getting promoted, it became more and more active service with the Marine Corps and less with the airline. I took I took military leave all the time from the airline, and the airline was very cooperative. Of course, the law says that they have to let you go, but they can always make it difficult if they so chose. But my bosses at the airline were very understanding and patriotic. They knew that the military duty took priority. And then, but I remained a reservist, sometimes on active duty. Then I retired from the reserve when several years after I was promoted to general officer. And 4 years went by, and 9/11 happened, and they called me back from retirement, and I did 2 more years of active duty. So those last 2 years were full time, and then I re-retired after that.
So, those 30 plus years of going in and out of active duty, where are some of the places you went?
Well, we deployed a lot, almost always in the summers to 29 Palms, California, which is where which is our primary desert training site. And we did that almost every summer, and then 5 times I went to Norway. 2 or 3 of those times were with my squadron. No, I guess only twice with my squadron. Other times just when I was more senior, visiting units that were deployed over there. So a lot of time in the desert training, a lot of time in Norway, a little bit of time in the Caribbean. We had some of our people doing counter-narcotics work down there, and so we went down there several times, and got some schooling in England at the National Defense College in England, which was a great NATO school. It was very educational, and so spent a lot of time traveling around. Yeah. And of course, other bases within the United States, like Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and all that.
At the same time, the Cold War was happening. What do you remember from that, and how was that affecting your career?
Well, we oriented our training toward who we thought might be the enemy. And of course, from the end of Vietnam, excuse me, from the end of Vietnam up until 9/11, no, excuse me, from the end of Vietnam up until Desert Storm, we trained as if the enemy were going to be either, if not the Soviet Union, at least an enemy that was Soviet trained and using Soviet equipment, with a greater orientation, as the years went by, with a greater orientation toward the Middle East. And as it turned out, Desert Storm was, in fact, a fight in the Middle East against an enemy that was using Soviet equipment and Soviet tactics. So, and then, of course, as the years went by, right up to the present day, the whole Marine Corps has started to reorient its focus toward what might be the next enemy.
Did you notice that change?
Is what?
Did you notice that change after the fall of the Soviet Union?
Yeah. Well, remember, I've been retired quite a while, so some of that change occurred long after I left, long after I took the uniform off. But I'm still involved, because well, I'm concerned about what's going on.
When did you retire?
Well, I retired the first time at the end of '97. And then, as I said, I got recalled from active duty in 01 after 9/11, and then I did 2 more years active duty, and then retired again in 03. Or returned to retirement, I should say. Yeah. And then in the meantime, also, I had also already retired from the airline too, because there was an age limit with the airline.
So post 9/11, what was your job?
Yeah. They recalled me to become the commanding general of the Marine Corps Mobilization Command, which at that time was located in Kansas City, Missouri. And I guess we knew there was going to be a big reserve mobilization, which is ongoing. It's been almost continuous since 9/11, using the reserves and the National Guard much more than we ever did before as a nation. And so I became the commanding general of the Marine Corps Mobilization Command, I guess because the system knew that I knew the system. So did that for let's see, I guess that was about 6 months. And then I transferred down to New Orleans and became the deputy commander of the Marine Corps Reserve in New Orleans. Did that for a little over a year, and then went back into retirement.
Now, I read somewhere you did State Department stuff too afterwards. Is that true?
Well, yeah. Wasn't looking for a job, but I got approached in the 06-07 time frame about working for a company called Civilian Police International, which had a contract, or we were bidding on a contract to do some work in Iraq for the State Department. Even though it was called Civilian Police International in the name of the company, what we were doing really wasn't police work per se. It was providing rule of law advisors to the Iraqis, lawyers, investigators, court administration people, judicial protection people, that sort of thing. So anyway, we made the proposal, got the contract, and then I went over to Iraq for a year to be the program manager.
What was Iraq like?
Well, it had quieted down. I got there, and last night's dinner you heard people talking about the surge in Iraq when General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker were the two principal Americans there, and my company and we began the program. I say my company, it wasn't my company, but the company I was working for began our program just toward the end of the surge. So as far as combat action around where we were, it had died down considerably. So we would get an occasional inbound rocket or a mortar round in the green zone, which was the primary government area in Baghdad, which is where we did most of our work. And but it was relatively quiet, not like the intense combat that took place other times at other places, and remained that way pretty much for the whole time that I was there. Still had to travel around. You couldn't go anywhere without a protective security detail, and I would have loved to have done more in just seeing the country, because there's an awful lot of history there, obviously going all the way back to biblical times. The only place that I got to that was relatively nice and I could travel around more freely was in Kurdistan. I had a couple of employees in Kurdistan, in a town called Erbil. I used to go up there to pay them. But that was really the only time that I spent any time outside of the Baghdad area. We lived and worked in a place called the Green Zone, which was the international zone, relatively safe, where all the government buildings were. But all of my people their daily work was usually outside the Green Zone in the various ministries, the Ministry of Justice, the Higher Judicial Council, and things like that.
So after that, you officially retired?
Yeah. Now I think I'm really retired. Yeah, right.
But you're still somewhat active when it comes to.
Well, yeah, but nothing official. It's all on my own, and I'm on the board of advisors of a think tank here in Washington, based here in Washington, that has. The think tank is the Jewish Institute for National Security Studies. Excuse me, the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. And I and several dozen other retired generals and admirals, including some much more higher ranked than I am, are on the board of advisors, along with a number of civilian experts, former diplomats and senators and what have you. And I still attend, when available, I attend the quarterly meetings of the Reserve Forces Policy Board, which meets quarterly, usually at the Pentagon.
Going back to Vietnam.
And I come up to Washington for things like last night's event, too, just because I like it.
Going back to Vietnam, what else do you remember?
Well, course, when you say Vietnam, remember we're talking about mostly Laos, where I was flying. Well, I remember it being a great way to earn a living as a young single guy, because like a lot of other young guys, I thought I was bulletproof and invisible back in those days. And obviously I wasn't, and if I had gotten hurt, maybe I would have not enjoyed it. Obviously, I obviously would not have enjoyed it nearly as much, but I enjoyed it. It was, I guess you could say that I felt more alive than ever. I loved the flying. I loved the time off. I was always around some really interesting people, some real characters in some cases. But it was memorable and enjoyable, and of course we were also aware that we were doing something that a lot of people didn't know much about, but yet was very important. So, especially when we were doing things on or near the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Is there anything else you want to share that we did not talk about yet?
Well, it's been a great life. I don't think of... I can't think of anything in particular other than whatever you might be interested in. It's been, nobody's ever going to hear me complain about anything. It's been very, very lucky.
Well, what are some things about Air America that most people don't know about?
Well, it was called covert, but it was about as overt as covert can be. It was really wasn't much of a secret. It was classified. But nobody in Southeast Asia had any illusions about who we were or what we were doing. I mean, the enemy certainly knew, and American military knew, and certainly, and American civilians that were working in Southeast Asia knew who we were. The only group that really didn't know much about Air America were the American civilians back home. And that's not because it was such a deep, dark secret. It really wasn't. I remember reading a Time magazine article way back when I was there that was an article about Air America. So it really wasn't much of a secret. It's just that people weren't paying attention. It kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Kind of like today. A lot of important things going on, but people would rather watch American Idol or something, But I remember it being a very interesting way to go to war.
There's a civilian. If you were killed or captured, what would happen then?
Well, we did have a couple of guys that were captured and were kept there for years and years, just like you read about all of the pilots that were shot down and spent their time in the Hanoi Hilton. When the guys that I remember getting captured, and this was before I got there, and there was a book out there about that, by the way. One of them called it "Reported to Be Alive." And they were the pilot and a newsman. I can't remember his name, but he was an NBC newsman who was flying with this guy. And they got shot down and captured. And they both became prisoners. And they were, because it was Laos, a relatively primitive country. It was really, there were years when nobody really knew anything about what had happened to these guys. And then eventually, I can't remember the details exactly, but eventually they were released. But we all knew that of course, if something did happen like that other people would try to come and rescue you. But there was no guarantee, and certainly no guarantee of an all-out effort that we always used to get the military guys. And by the way, some of that all-out effort to rescue military guys involved Air America too. When I first got there, the search and rescues of the pilots that were going to North Vietnam, if they were coming from the seaside, mostly the Navy guys, that was being done by Navy search and rescue equipment and what have you. Excuse me. But when I was there in early '67, going from the land side, if somebody got shot down and wound up in the western part of Vietnam or in Laos, then it was usually us, the Jolly Greens, the Jolly Green Giants. You probably heard of them, the Air Force search and rescue guys. They were very good, and they were courageous, and they would go to where they needed to go to make a rescue. But they had just arrived in Laos, or in Thailand and in Laos, where they were based in Thailand mostly. And they just didn't know the terrain nearly as well as we were. And on top of that, you know, some of our guys had been there for 6-8 years and remained the whole time for 15 years until we left in 75. But the Jolly Green Giants were courageous, and they were good, but they just weren't as experienced and didn't know the area nearly as well as we were. And also, we were always on the scene. We were always up there. The Jolly Greens would deploy to the appropriate location when needed, but we were always there. So frequently, we were the first on the scene, and made, probably up until right through 1967, we were probably the ones that made most of the search and rescues that took place up to that point.